Hello and welcome to Lesson 6, the UK Impacts of Climate Change. This is the final lesson of the climate change topic. So I've just recorded a short video to help you get your head around the lesson. So the actual lesson, we have to look at the social, the economic, the environmental impacts of climate change within the UK. This is part of the last part of the spec, which is all about climate change being a global issue. And last lesson, lesson 5, we're looking at the global impacts, especially in low-lying areas like Tuvalu or Kiribati, but also in other places like Brazil or with forest fires in Australia. So now we're sort of looking at our own country and what will be the possible impacts of climate change in the country. Um, the highlighted area on the screen here shows you the possible things you could write about, but they're just suggestions. So we're looking at types of impacts, and on this slide you can see the idea about social, economic, and environmental from last lesson. And yeah, that's all important. One important thing to notice is that you can combine social and economic to form the word socio-economic, because those two impacts are actually quite closely linked. You can't really affect economic without social and vice versa. But one new thing here that we're looking at is the idea that impacts can be positive and negative. And in this context, we're talking about a positive impact being an opportunity. What could business, for example, make out of climate change in the UK? Because it's not all bad things. There are some good things, and also the negative impacts are the threats. So we've got this idea of positive, negative opportunities or threats. Okay, so this map below here shows a map of the positives and negatives, the opportunities but the threats, and you can see that the purple areas are areas which could be flooded by rising sea levels, which does include parts of North Kent, parts of London. That's with a 5 metre sea level rise, which is not foreseeable in the next 100 years, more like in the next few centuries. But eventually, the shape of our country will change, and lots of low-lying areas will actually be flooded. But this is quite alarmist. In your lifetime, this will not happen. Hopefully, he says. So this video, I'm not going to play it now. It's just a summary of what could happen with a map showing where the impacts might be affected. That's quite nice to think about the geography of the impacts, because the whole of the UK isn't going to be affected in the same way. Some places will be affected more positively, other places worse. So it might get wetter in some places and drier in others. It's very difficult to actually work out what the impacts are going to be because we don't know really. We find it hard to forecast the weather beyond 5 days. So forecasting the impacts of climate change over 30 years is impossible to do at this stage. But here is the best sort of estimate of what we think is going to happen. This article on the BBC News website from 2015 is pretty nice. It summarises 5 ways that climate change could affect the UK. Click on the link to find out more about that. Now, this bit here really is sort of the real meat of the lesson in terms of the impacts. So I've put, obviously, green things are good, positives, the opportunities. I've classified these as social, economic, and environmental. But then also the negatives, the threats are in red. And we've classified them by social, which is people, economic, which is all about finance and business and profits, and environmental is about ecosystems, fauna and flora. So once you've sort of got your head around that, you need to really come up with this essay task, and it's the one main task from this lesson, which is this the socio-economic impacts of climate change within the UK are more concerning than the environmental impacts. To what extent do you agree with this statement? So you've got to come up with an argument. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? To what extent do you agree with it? You have to think about your position really pretty much straight away. So I'm assuming that you're going to probably agree with it. And the reason why I think we can agree with it is that the socio-economic impacts are the top 2/3 of this impact table, and the environmental are these bits here, the bottom third. So it looks like the impacts are much greater just in terms of the quantity of impacts. However, if you're looking at it at a more sort of finer level, you can see that actually the impacts are caused, the economic impacts and the social impacts, the socio-economic impacts are affected by environmental change. So there's a bit of room for discussion here, and I'll be interested to see what you come up with in terms of your argument. So what I'm suggesting is that you have this uh, plan. So you explain why one socio-economic impact is bigger than an environmental impact. So you've got a nice paragraph there. You explain both impacts, support it with evidence. You do the same for the second paragraph as well. Then you have a third paragraph, which is writing a conclusion. And this bit of writing here is an exemplar from a different question, so please don't confuse them. This is something that Mr. Rolls made, and it talks about the to what extent do the impacts of climate change bring more opportunities than threats. Obviously, this is a different essay to what you're doing, so you can't copy it. In fact, if you copy it, you'll get a wrong answer. But what I like about it is the way that he's discussed. He's used some discursive connectives, things like however, on one hand, on the other hand, and then he's got a conclusion at the end. So that's a sort of way to be able to phrase things. Anyway, short video. Hope that helps you to get your head around what this lesson involves. Bye bye.